The Nintendo DS is about as universally nostalgic as it gets, or I mean, at least it is as far as handheld gaming goes. It sold over 154 million units in its lifetime, numbers that are only second to the Nintendo Switch. But that's a hybrid console, not just a handheld, so technically the DS reigns as the top-selling handheld of all time. And many iconic series called the DS home, but few games, and by that I mean one game, were as widely known and beloved as Nintendogs. For the few that don't know at this point, somehow, Nintendogs was a series of pet simulation games where you could have all the fun of owning a dog and none of the mess or responsibility. And back in the 2000s when it came out, Nintendogs was super cutting edge. The series was second in sales only to New Super Mario Bros., and it was such a big deal that there were even promotional events where players could bring their game and meet the Nintendogs of celebrities like Hailey Duff and Utada Hikaru, which I imagine in the 2000s was probably pretty cool. As seems to sadly be a running trend with mid-2000s gaming, I did not have a Nintendo DS, and so I did not experience Nintendogs. Well, not while I was growing up anyways. But regardless of my newfound familiarity with the game itself, there's one thing that just about everyone knows about Nintendogs. It's very much a thing of the past, dying off with the Nintendo 3DS's Nintendogs plus Cats. But why exactly is that? What caused the abandonment of Nintendogs? And how could Nintendo be so cold-hearted? Well, today we're gonna take a little look-see and learn what happened to Nintendogs. And to do that, I think we may as well start from the top, because it's hard to understand where the series went without understanding where it started and what made it so special. And also, I just think it's all really interesting, so. The concept of what would ultimately become Nintendogs originally had nothing at all to do with dogs. You see, back in the 90s, there was a still unseen tech demo called Cabbage for the Nintendo 64 DD, a disk drive attachment for the, Nintendo 64. In Cabbage, you would take care of little creatures called cabbages that lived in a garden, with the game making use of the 64 DD's internal clock. With this, the garden and your cabbages would still function even while the console was turned off. And the intention was to also make it linkable to the Game Boy so you could keep the little guys company away from home too. Basically, think back to the Tamagotchi craze of the 90s. They wanted to build and expand off of that, but make it Nintendo, and also name it after a vegetable. The team was aiming to revolutionize in ways that, in the end, weren't quite feasible yet. Like being able to bring your 64DD to convenience stores and buy items for your cabbages, which was kinda, ambitious. And as the members of the team grew busy with other projects, it was ultimately scrapped in development. But as time went on, the concept of a pet simulation game like this would go on to inspire future Nintendo titles. Years later, when asked about Cabbage, Nintendo's Shigeru Miyamoto said, "It disappeared, didn't it?" However, the conversations and design techniques that popped up when we were making Cabbage are, of course, connected to Nintendogs and other things that we're doing now. So it could be said that Cabbage was the origin of Nintendogs, to an extent anyway. But the first real iteration of Nintendogs, one that was not vegetable-oriented, was a demo for the GameCube featuring a dog that, quote-unquote, moved and looked like a real one, inspired by Miyamoto recently having gotten a pet dog himself. If that sounds vague to you, that's because it is. I have no idea how you were necessarily meant to interact with the dog because I couldn't find much information, mainly just some brief mentions of it like this one by Hideki Kono, who later went on to develop Nintendogs for the DS. Kono was also part of the development of the Nintendo DS itself, and so was very familiar with the handheld's functions like the touchscreen, dual screen, microphone, Wi-Fi connectivity, etc. And he was aiming to develop a game that made use of every single feature. He said, "After thinking about it, we thought we should have something with voice recognition, something where you speak and something would respond, and something you can touch on screen to make it feel real." Thinking back to the GameCube demo and knowing what was possible now with the DS, he reasoned that since you could pet a dog and teach a dog to do things, a pet simulation game would be perfect. I couldn't seem to find out when Nintendogs officially began development for the DS, but in September 2004, a tech demo of the game called Puppy Times was unveiled. Thankfully, it would later be renamed to Nintendogs, and the full game was released in Japan shortly after in April of 2005. Nintendogs was released with 3 versions initially, with the only differences being that depending on the version, the dog breeds available to adopt at the start of the game varied, as did the obtainable items. Though with something called Bark Mode, you could obtain items and breeds from all versions. You see, Bark Mode was a way to wirelessly connect, interact, and trade with other players. The only catch was you had to be in a 60-foot radius of each other, but that was at least a huge improvement from the Game Boy Advance wireless adapter's 10-foot radius. So that was pretty cool, but Nintendogs was at its most impressive with its use of the DS's touchscreen and built-in microphone. Just as planned, with the touchscreen you could pet and interact with your dog, and with the microphone you could teach it to recognize its name or learn various commands like sit and jump and whatever other tricks you teach dogs. I don't know, my dog is either really disobedient or really dumb because she doesn't know any tricks. Just kidding, Bubber, I love you. But yeah, to me, even as someone who didn't play the game until many years after release, this is really impressive and cool for its time. If little Youth had a DS, you can bet she'd have been totally obsessed with Nintendogs. But I mean, at least she had the Chow Garden. Nintendogs was a total hit around the world, selling almost 24 million copies between versions, which makes it the second best-selling DS game of all time. And it's largely credited with helping to introduce gaming to a larger female and casual audience. Because in 2006, it was reported that 44% of Nintendo DS owners were female, and that the majority of Nintendogs players were as well. This was pretty big for the time, since before that point, a huge portion of consoles and games were advertised towards a male audience. And, well, they still largely are, but it's definitely not as skewed as it was back then. But yeah, Nintendogs have been a long time coming, from Cabbage to the GameCube demo, and finally to the Nintendo DS. Not only was it a commercial success, but the game had created a lasting legacy for itself, becoming a childhood favorite for millions, even non-gamers. Which, as we learned in my Wii Sports video, shameless plug, in the 2000s, Nintendo was very big on bringing in the casuals who didn't normally play games. Instead of impressive graphics or processing power, Nintendo wanted to focus on entertainment that could appeal to everyone. And that was exactly what Nintendogs accomplished. So with Nintendogs and the DS becoming something of a phenomenon, it's really no surprise Nintendo made moves to capitalize on the game's popularity. The Nintendogs sequel, Nintendogs Cats, was released in 2011 as a launch title for the Nintendo 3DS. The idea of a sequel had been played with for years, originally considered for the Wii. Games based around cats, horses, and dolphins were just a few of the ideas floating around, but since the Wii didn't have a microphone and Miyamoto wasn't feeling particularly inspired by a sequel anyway, the project was dropped for quite some time. But eventually, just as the team was wondering once again what to do for a sequel, Miyamoto got a cat and expressed, quote-unquote, how interesting it was when a dog and cat lived together. And so the sequel's direction was finally decided, and the Nintendogs sequel would include both dogs and cats. As an aside, it's funny how much I relate to Miyamoto here. It feels like he just got hyperfixated on making a game with dogs when he got a dog, then lost interest until he got a cat and got hyperfixated on making a game with cats. Not to say he's a complete ADHD mess like me, just saying, you know, I get it. Anyway, during development, the team put a lot of consideration into how different the behaviors between dogs and cats are, even down to their movements, which resulted in more work, but they felt it was crucial for cat lovers to be able to enjoy the game. This whole cat thing may have backfired a little bit, but we'll get to that. But it wasn't just cats that they were putting a lot of work into. With the capabilities of the 3DS, they were able to put more detail into the movements, models, and personalities of the dogs that couldn't be achieved with the DS. And what I found really cool about the game was with the 3DS camera's technology, your pet could even recognize your face. And with the system's compatibility with augmented reality cards, you could even take 3D pictures with them. I don't know, I think it's really awesome. So last but not least, there was one more big change. Where the original Nintendogs Bark mode required you to insert the game, set it to sleep mode, close the DS and walk around to use it, with the 3DS's Street Pass feature, you could exchange game data with other players even if the game cartridge wasn't in the 3DS. You could be playing an entirely different game and open up Nintendogs later to find you to exchange data with someone else. As you can see, there were a pretty good amount of additions and improvements with Nintendogs Cats, and despite not selling as much as the original, I mean, after all, the 3DS did sell less than the DS, so it makes sense, the game still went on to become the very first 3DS game to go platinum, selling over 4 million copies. As far as the game's overall reception goes though, it was pretty mixed, with the biggest complaint I've seen being a lack of innovation, aka more of the same. Which, I don't know, I don't feel like that's 1000% fair, considering we did just go over a list of new and or improved game features, but what can you do? Not to say I don't kinda get it though, it's not like there was anything truly groundbreaking like the first time around, but with only 6 years between entries, it's just, how much could they really do? The difference in technology between, say, the 64DD or the GameCube and the Nintendo DS was far greater than the difference in technology between the DS and the 3DS. I have to wonder if maybe people were just expecting a little too much out of Nintendogs at the time, which is weird for me to say considering I'm not really like super defensive of Nintendo in general. Oh yeah, and remember how I said the whole cat thing kinda backfired? Another complaint I've seen is that the cat's gameplay is pretty boring and pointless, but like, as someone who's owned both dogs and cats, I think you've just gotta accept that cats are a little less suitable for an interactive pet simulator if exciting is what you're looking for. Hey, at least Nintendo tried to give cat lovers something, and like I said, they tried really hard to make the cats as realistic as possible. So yeah, Nintendogs Cats sold just fine as far as 3DS games go, but in the end was a big letdown for a lot of people, regardless of whether or not I think that was totally justified. With all that said, we get to the main question I've been leading up to. What happened to Nintendogs? As in, why haven't we gotten a new one despite apparent increasing demand? Well, there's not any kind of official statement to go off of, at least not that I could find. So the best we can do is take a look at a few factors and try and make our best guess. To start, Nintendogs plus Cats was obviously the last entry we saw in the series, and even though it wasn't a commercial failure, in the end it definitely sold significantly less than the original Nintendogs did. So it's possible that Nintendo looked at the numbers and figured there just wouldn't be that much of a demand for a while. There also comes the issue of, well, what else could they do to keep it fresh if they did make a new one? After all, people complained the sequel was too much of the same, and I can't personally think of much more they could have added between then and now. And probably most importantly, the Nintendo Switch doesn't have a built-in mic, so that kinda complicates things a little bit since that was a huge feature of the game, and part of the reason they didn't put one on the Wii. Sure, they could have used a mic attachment, but no one really likes having to buy an additional accessory to be able to even play a game in the first place. It's obviously much better to make use of features already built in. I think it's probably a combination of all of these things that's the reason we haven't seen a new Nintendogs in almost 15 years. God, I feel old. But that doesn't necessarily mean all hope is lost, because there's been a huge rise in the exact kind of game category Nintendogs easily falls into. As we all know, cozy gaming has become an enormous trend ever since the success of Animal Crossing New Horizons for the Switch. Years ago, where Nintendogs plus Cats was widely considered boring because there was nothing new and exciting, there's now a huge market for games that are objectively kinda repetitive and boring sometimes. That's because they're soothing in their monotony. In a world that had become much more chaotic for a while thanks to a certain world event that will remain unnamed, don't worry advertisers, in general there seems to be a lot more value placed on quote-unquote boring games than there ever was before. So maybe it's because of the new market that Animal Crossing New Horizons helped open up that Nintendo renewed the trademark for Nintendogs in the US back in early 2025. And well, the Switch 2 does have a mic, which already solves that issue. I'm still not really sure what else they could add to the gameplay of Nintendogs for those that are more difficult to please, but with the trademark renewal, there's at least a chance they're cooking something up for the future. The story of Nintendogs was way more interesting than I had thought it would be. I never in my life had heard of cabbage until now, and I am pretty optimistic we'll get something Nintendogs related on the Switch 2 eventually, which will, unfortunately, give me another reason to buy one. If you have any ideas for a future Nintendogs game or any thoughts in general, let me know in the comments. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, bye!